The stars stretched like endless silver rivers in the black ocean of space. The human ship Aurora glided forward, its engines humming with steady rhythm. Inside, the crew had been awake for days, preparing for the descent onto a world that had only been seen through distant telescopes and grainy scans. The planet was known among traders and explorers, but few dared to land without permission from its ruler, the Queen of the Zyori people. Daniel stood near the observation window, his eyes fixed on the glowing sphere ahead. The planet was covered in thick forests, shining lakes, and mountains that seemed to pierce the clouds. He had traveled across many systems, but something about this world pulled at his heart. It felt alive in a way no other planet had. The captain, a steady man named Harris, walked into the room and looked over Daniel's shoulder. "Remember," Harris said in a calm voice, "this is not just another stop. We are guests here. The Queen holds power over this world, and we cannot risk offending her." Daniel nodded. He was not a soldier or a leader. He worked as a linguist, someone who studied words and patterns of speech. While others focused on weapons and trade goods, he spent his time with old recordings, trying to unlock the meaning hidden in alien languages. Many on the crew thought it was a useless hobby, but Daniel believed that words were stronger than guns. The Aurora entered the planet's atmosphere, shaking as fire licked its hull. Outside, the green forests came closer and closer, until the ship landed on a flat field marked with strange white stones. Waiting for them were tall figures in dark silver armor. Their helmets were shaped like the heads of birds, with long crests flowing in the wind. They stood in silence, their weapons glowing faintly at their sides. The airlock opened, and Harris led the group down the ramp. Daniel followed, his heart pounding. The armored figures did not move until a new figure appeared behind them. She was taller than the rest, her presence commanding. Her armor was not metal but woven cloth mixed with shining threads, and her head was uncovered. Daniel saw her face clearly for the first time. Her skin was smooth, with a faint silver glow. Her eyes were a deep shade of violet, and when she looked at the humans, her gaze was steady and sharp. This was the Queen of the Zyori. She raised her hand, and her guards bowed their heads. She spoke, her voice strong and clear, carrying across the field like music shaped into words. Daniel could not understand her fully, but he caught fragments from his studies. He heard words like permission, outsiders, and peace. Captain Harris bowed his head and answered through the ship's translator device. The machine changed his words into a rough version of the Zyori tongue. The Queen listened, her expression unreadable, then gave a small nod. She turned, and her people formed a path toward a tall structure rising beyond the field. It looked like a palace built from white stone and living trees woven together. As the humans walked through the alien city, Daniel's eyes moved everywhere. The streets were wide and clean, lined with tall towers shaped like spirals. Bridges of light connected buildings, and plants grew alongside stone, as if the city and the forest were one. The people of the city watched the humans quietly, their faces showing curiosity but not fear. Inside the palace, the humans were guided into a hall that seemed carved from crystal. The Queen sat on a raised seat, her posture straight, her eyes sharp. The hall was filled with guards, advisors, and scribes. Every sound echoed, from footsteps to whispers. Captain Harris stepped forward and introduced the crew. The translator spoke in rough tones, but it was enough for the Queen to understand. She listened without interrupting. When Harris finished, she spoke again, her words flowing like water over stones. Daniel listened closely. He recognized patterns in her speech. She spoke of laws, of respect, and of the balance her people kept with the land. She warned that strangers who broke these rules would face consequences. The other humans stood still, unsure of how much they understood. Daniel, however, leaned forward, his mind racing as he connected each phrase with the fragments he had studied. For a brief moment, the queen's eyes met his. Daniel felt as though she could see through him, reading his thoughts. He quickly looked away, but the memory of her gaze stayed in his mind. When the meeting ended, the humans were given rooms inside the palace. The queen left without another word, her guards following behind her. The crew felt a mix of relief and unease. Some whispered that the queen was cold and dangerous. Others said her silence was a warning. But Daniel thought differently. To him, her voice had not been cold. It had been careful, like a teacher testing a student. She had spoken with pride, but also with weight, as if every word carried the history of her people. That night, as the others rested, Daniel sat near the window of his room. The city glowed with lights made from living crystals. The air was filled with the distant hum of alien songs. He opened his notebook and began writing the words he remembered from the Queen's speech. Each sound, each symbol, each tone mattered. He whispered them softly, practicing until his voice grew hoarse. His crew might not care, and the Queen might not notice, but Daniel believed that learning her language was the key. Not just to survival, but to something greater. Far away in her private chamber, the Queen removed her royal cloak and sat in silence. One of her advisors asked if the humans could be trusted. She gave no answer at first, but then her eyes narrowed. One of them listens, she said. One of them tries to understand. The Queen did not know his name yet, but she remembered his face. And so, the first step of a story neither human nor alien expected had quietly begun. The next morning, the halls of the palace echoed with the sound of footsteps and quiet whispers. The humans had been told that they would be brought before the Queen once again. This time it would not be a short greeting but a council, where the Queen and her advisors would question them. The air carried both tension and curiosity. Daniel walked with the group, his notebook tucked under his arm. He had barely slept the night before, spending hours trying to recall every word the Queen had spoken. His voice was still sore from whispering phrases to himself, but his mind was sharper than ever. He knew this meeting would be important, and he wanted to catch as much of her language as possible. The humans entered the great hall again. It looked even more magnificent in daylight. Beams of sunlight streamed through crystal windows, casting rainbow colors across the polished floor. At the far end of the hall, the Queen sat upon her throne. Her violet eyes were calm, but her posture showed strength. Around her stood advisors in long robes, each carrying tablets carved with strange symbols. When the humans approached, the Queen raised her hand. Silence fell across the chamber. She began to speak, her voice clear, carrying a tone that demanded respect. The translator hummed to life, repeating her words in broken human speech. You are strangers here. Tell us why you came. Tell us if you seek trade, alliance, or war. Captain Harris stepped forward. He bowed slightly, then spoke with careful words. We come in peace. We wish to understand your people and to share knowledge. Humanity does not seek to take, only to learn. The translator repeated his message in the alien tongue. The Queen's face showed no change. She studied the humans with the same calm eyes, then spoke again. Her advisors leaned closer, whispering to one another as her words echoed. Daniel listened closely. He recognized a few phrases. She spoke of history, of outsiders who once arrived and caused harm. She spoke of scars left behind and trust that could not be given easily. The translator spoke, but the machine's voice felt hollow compared to the strength of her language. Daniel's fingers gripped his notebook tightly. He wanted to speak, but he held himself back. This was not the right time. The Queen's eyes swept across the group, then settled on Daniel for a brief second. It was only a flicker, but it made his heart race. Did she notice the way he listened more carefully than the others? The meeting continued. Questions were asked, and Captain Harris answered them with calm professionalism. The advisors wrote down every word, their glowing tablets filling with symbols. When one of the humans tried to speak out of turn, the Queen raised her hand, and the entire hall went silent again. Her authority was absolute. After what felt like hours, the Queen stood. Her long robe shimmered under the light. She gave a final statement, one that even Daniel could partly understand. He caught words like watch, prove, and time. The translator confirmed his guess. You will stay as guests. We will watch your actions. If you show respect, trust may grow. If you bring harm, you will answer to me. With that, the meeting ended. The Queen turned and walked out of the hall, her guards moving like shadows at her side. The humans were guided back to their quarters. On the way, some of the crew whispered among themselves. One called her cold, another called her proud. But Daniel stayed quiet. He kept replaying her words in his head, matching sounds with meanings. She had not been cold. She had been protective, guarding her people's safety. He respected that. Later that evening, Daniel wandered into the palace gardens. The guards allowed him entry but followed from a distance. The garden was unlike any he had seen before. Trees with silver leaves rose high above, and flowers glowed with soft light. Strange insects hovered like sparks, filling the air with a quiet hum. Daniel sat near a fountain, opened his notebook, and began practicing again. He repeated the Queen's words slowly, trying to shape his mouth like hers. Trust. Prove. Time. He whispered them again and again, until the sounds began to flow more naturally. Unseen by him, one of the Queen's advisors walked nearby. The advisor paused, listening to Daniel's attempts. His eyes narrowed with curiosity. Instead of stopping him, the advisor left silently, perhaps to tell the Queen later what he had witnessed. Back in her private chamber, the Queen removed her crown and let her robe fall onto a chair. She looked out over her city through the balcony. Lights shimmered in the distance, and the air was filled with the songs of her people. An advisor entered and bowed deeply. My Queen, the human who carries the book, he tries to speak our tongue. The Queen turned her head slightly. Does he mock us? No, the advisor replied. He speaks with effort. His sounds are broken, but he repeats them again and again. He listens as if every word is treasure. The Queen was silent for a long moment. Finally, she said, strange. Most who come here care only for gold or power. Few care for words. She returned her gaze to the city, but in her mind, she remembered the human's face. The one who had looked at her with sharp focus. She wondered if his interest was real or only another trick of outsiders. That night, Daniel wrote until his hand ached. He copied symbols from memory, building his own dictionary. He told himself that if he could master the Queen's language, he could show her that humans were not like the invaders of her past. He did not know that his small effort had already reached her ears. The first meeting was over, but something unseen had begun to take shape between them. Not a treaty, not a trade, but a bridge built from sound, patience, and unspoken curiosity. The palace felt less like stone walls and more like a living heart. Vines stretched across marble arches, glowing insects lit dark corners, and soft streams ran under bridges within the halls. Every day the humans were allowed to walk through certain areas, and every day Daniel carried his notebook close, searching for words in every whisper, every chant, and every song. Most of the crew spent their time resting or studying maps of the region. A few joked about the queen, saying she was beautiful but distant. Daniel ignored their voices. He spent hours near the palace gardens and the open markets of the city, where the voices of the people flowed like rivers. Children laughed with bright tones, merchants sang prices for goods, and elders told stories in strong voices. At first, Daniel understood almost nothing. The words fell too fast, filled with twists his tongue could not copy. But he refused to give up. He wrote symbols, practiced sounds, and matched them with gestures. When a child laughed at his broken accent, he smiled instead of frowning. Slowly, day by day, the sounds began to make sense. One afternoon, Daniel sat in the garden beside the glowing fountain. He repeated a word he had heard in the hall during the first meeting. Shara, he whispered, shaping the sound carefully. Shara. It meant trust. He knew because the queen had used it when she spoke of time and proof. The word felt heavy in his mouth, but it carried power. Behind him, a shadow moved. One of the queen's guards, tall and armored, listened quietly. The guard's expression softened for a moment before turning away. Daniel did not see, but word of his effort continued to spread through the palace. That evening, the humans were invited again into the hall. The queen wished to hear more from them. As the crew prepared, Captain Harris warned them. "We are still being tested. One mistake and they may send us away. Speak carefully, and let the translator do its job." The group entered the crystal hall. The queen sat on her throne, her robe flowing like liquid silver. She raised her hand, and silence filled the chamber. Her advisors stood close, their glowing tablets ready to record. Captain Harris bowed and spoke of trade routes, technology, and peaceful exchange. The translator echoed his voice in broken alien words. The queen listened but showed no reaction. When he finished, she asked a question, her voice rising like a song. The translator paused, then spoke. "What do you give that others do not already bring?" The question hung heavy in the air. Some of the crew shifted uncomfortably. Harris began to answer with promises of knowledge and tools, but Daniel felt something stir inside him. The queen's words carried more than trade. She wanted truth, not metal or numbers. Daniel's heart pounded. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward. His voice was soft but steady. He spoke not through the translator, but with his own mouth, in her language. "Shara," he said. The hall froze. Every advisor turned their head. The guards straightened. Even Captain Harris's eyes widened in shock. The queen's violet eyes locked onto him. The air grew still. Daniel swallowed, then repeated the word more clearly. "Shara. Trust." A long silence followed. For the first time, the queen's lips curved slightly, not into a smile but into something thoughtful. She spoke a single phrase, simple enough for Daniel to catch. "You listen." Daniel bowed his head, his face burning. He stepped back, unsure if he had gone too far. But the queen did not call for guards or punishment. She only studied him, her eyes unreadable. Then she turned back to Harris and allowed the meeting to continue. When it ended, the crew returned to their quarters. Harris pulled Daniel aside, his voice low. "What were you thinking?" Speaking without the translator could have been dangerous. Daniel met his gaze. "She does not want only machines to speak for us. She wants us to try. If we never learn her language, we will always be strangers." Harris sighed but did not argue. He could see the fire in Daniel's eyes, and he knew the young man would not stop. That night, Daniel worked harder than ever. He whispered words again and again until his throat ached. He practiced greetings, questions, and small phrases. He wrote symbols until the pages of his notebook were filled. Sleep came late, and when it did, dreams of violet eyes and silver robes filled his mind. The next morning, Daniel walked through the market again. This time, he tried to speak small words to the merchants. At first, they laughed at his broken tones, but then they corrected him gently. A woman selling glowing fruit placed one in his hand after he said the word for thank you correctly. A child clapped when he pronounced a number without mistake. Step by step, Daniel was no longer just a stranger. He was becoming a student. Far away in her chamber, the queen listened as her advisor spoke. "The human with the book continues to study. He speaks to the people in the market. They laugh, but they also answer him." The queen sat in silence, her eyes on the horizon beyond her balcony. At last, she spoke softly. "Perhaps he understands more than the others. Perhaps he knows that words carry more than trade or war." Her advisor bowed and left, leaving her alone. The queen closed her eyes, remembering the human's voice as he spoke her word. Shara. It had been broken, imperfect, but filled with meaning. For the first time in many years, she felt something stir inside her chest. It was not trust yet, but it was the beginning of something she could not name. Daniel, unaware of her thoughts, sat in his room with the notebook open on his lap. His voice was rough, his eyes heavy, but his heart was steady. He believed that words could build bridges higher than walls, and he was determined to prove it. What he did not yet know was that each broken word he spoke had already begun to change the way the queen saw humanity. The barrier of language was still tall, but with every sound, with every phrase, Daniel was climbing higher. The days in the palace began to move like a rhythm. The humans met the queen's advisors, walked through the markets, and studied the land around the city. But for Daniel, each day was a new chance to add another word, another phrase, another piece of meaning to his notebook. He carried it everywhere, its pages filled with strange symbols, broken translations, and sketches of sounds. One morning, the humans were invited once again to the great hall. The queen wished to speak of history. Captain Harris prepared a list of questions about trade and resources, but Daniel felt something stronger in the queen's message. She did not wish to speak only of goods. She wished to speak of the past, of what shaped her people. The hall glowed with crystal light as the queen entered. She did not sit on her throne immediately. Instead, she walked slowly to the center of the hall. Her robe shimmered, and her presence filled the space like a tide. She raised her hand, and the advisors brought forward great tablets carved with ancient symbols. She began to speak, her voice steady and filled with weight. The translator hummed, but its broken words could not capture the beauty of her speech. Daniel listened closely, his heart racing as he caught pieces of meaning. She spoke of a time when invaders from the stars had come, bringing fire and ruin. The Zyuri had fought but had suffered greatly. Cities had burned, rivers had run black, and families had been torn apart. Her voice carried sorrow, but also pride. She spoke of how her ancestors rebuilt, planting forests again, raising towers from the ashes, and weaving songs to heal their spirits. She told of warriors who stood unbroken, and healers who gave their lives so that the young might live. The hall was silent. Even the human crew, though they understood only fragments, felt the power of her words. Daniel's chest tightened. He heard phrases he had studied, words for loss, words for strength, words for survival. He whispered them to himself, shaping them carefully. His voice trembled, but he felt pulled to answer. When the queen finished, silence filled the room. No one moved. The advisors lowered their eyes in respect. Captain Harris started to speak, but Daniel took a step forward before he could. His heart pounded as he spoke, not through the translator, but with his own voice. The words were broken, his accent heavy, but the meaning was clear. Your people, strong, Daniel said in her language. Your people, fight, heal, live. Not lost. Not broken. The hall froze again. The humans behind him stared in shock. The queen's advisors whispered quickly, some with frowns, others with surprise. The queen herself tilted her head slightly. Her violet eyes fixed on Daniel. For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. It was not mockery. It was recognition. You speak our pain, she said slowly in her own tongue. Daniel bowed his head. His face burned, but he did not step back. He wanted her to know that he was not mocking her, that he meant every word. The queen raised her hand, and the hall grew quiet. She stepped down from her throne and walked toward Daniel. The sound of her steps echoed across the floor. When she stood before him, she spoke again, her voice softer. Why do you try? She asked in her language, slow enough that Daniel could understand most of it. Others use machines. You use your own mouth. Why? Daniel swallowed hard. He searched for words, then answered in simple phrases. Machine has no heart. Words from mouth have heart. I want you to know heart. For a moment, the hall seemed to hold its breath. The queen studied him, her eyes unreadable. Then she turned and walked back to her throne. She gave no order, no judgment. But the small curve of her lips remained. The meeting ended soon after, but the memory of that moment stayed with everyone. The humans whispered about it, some worried, others amazed. Captain Harris pulled Daniel aside later, his voice sharp but quiet. You risk too much, Harris said. But, maybe you reached her in a way we cannot. Daniel nodded. He knew he had crossed a line, but he also knew he had done something important. That evening, Daniel returned to the garden. He sat under the silver trees, his notebook open. The words of the Queen's story echoed in his mind. He tried to write them, to shape them with human letters, so they would never fade. The sound of footsteps drew near. Daniel looked up and froze. It was the Queen herself, walking without guards. Her robe shimmered faintly under the garden lights. She stopped a few steps away, her eyes steady on him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she asked in her language, slowly, You write my words? Daniel nodded, holding up his notebook. Yes. Your words, strong. Important. The Queen stepped closer, her gaze falling on the pages. She studied the broken symbols, the rough attempts at her language. For the first time, she laughed softly. The sound was like wind through glass. You make mistakes, she said gently. But you try. That is rare. Daniel smiled awkwardly. I learn. You teach. The queen raised an eyebrow, then gave a faint nod. Perhaps. But learning our tongue is not simple. It carries more than sound. It carries spirit. I want to learn spirit, Daniel said firmly. Her eyes lingered on him, as if testing his resolve. Finally, she turned toward the fountain and spoke, her words flowing like a quiet song. She told him a short tale, one that children of her people learned when young. It was about a bird that lost its wings but found a way to fly with the wind. Daniel listened, repeating the key words. She corrected him when he stumbled, her voice patient. For a brief time, the queen was not only a ruler but also a teacher. And Daniel was not just a human visitor but a student sitting at her side. When she finished, she looked at him once more. You hear more than sound. You feel meaning. That may be your gift. Daniel bowed his head. Thank you. The queen turned to leave, her robe brushing softly against the garden stones. She did not look back, but Daniel could still feel the weight of her presence. That night, Daniel wrote until his hand shook. He wrote the bird's tale, her corrections, her laughter. He wanted to remember every detail. For the first time, he felt not just like an outsider trying to learn, but like someone who had been allowed a step closer to her world. The bond was small, fragile, but real. And though neither of them said it, both knew that something had begun to grow, something beyond duty, beyond trade, beyond walls of history. The palace had become a place of routine. The humans were treated with courtesy, and they had begun to learn how to walk through the city without drawing too much suspicion. But one morning, the rhythm broke. The sound of horns shook the palace walls. Guards rushed through the halls, their armor gleaming as they hurried to the queen's side. Daniel and the other humans were quickly gathered and told to remain in their quarters. Captain Harris argued, but the guards were firm. Something dangerous was happening outside. Through the high windows, Daniel saw smoke rising on the horizon. The sky glowed faint red, as if fire had touched the forest. His heart tightened. He knew this was not an accident. A messenger entered the hall, his face pale. He bowed before the queen and spoke quickly. Daniel caught fragments of the words attack, enemies, border. The translator confirmed his fears. A rival empire had sent ships into the skies of the Zyari world. They had always threatened, but now they were moving in force. The queen stood, her robe flowing like silver flame. She gave sharp commands, her voice ringing through the hall. Warriors gathered, advisors carried tablets, and the palace filled with tension. The humans begged to know what was happening. Captain Harris said they could help, that their ship had weapons, that humanity was no stranger to defense. But the queen was uncertain. She turned her eyes toward Harris, then to Daniel. For a brief moment, Daniel thought he saw hesitation, trust and doubt fighting within her. Finally, she spoke. The translator echoed her words. You came as guests. This is not your war. Stay out of it. The words cut deep. Daniel felt helpless. He wanted to argue, but Harris placed a hand on his shoulder, warning him to stay quiet. The guards led them back to their quarters. Hours passed. The sky outside darkened with smoke and fire. The humans could hear distant thunder, not from storms but from weapons in the air. Daniel paced the room, his mind racing. He had studied the queen's words, her history, her spirit. He knew she carried the weight of her people on her shoulders. To her, Asking for help from outsiders meant weakness. But to Daniel, silence meant disaster. He gripped his notebook and whispered to himself. Words, words can change. Ignoring the warnings, he left the quarters. The guards at the door blocked his way, but he spoke quickly in their language. I must see the queen. It is important. The guards frowned but were startled by his effort. His accent was poor, but the meaning was clear. One finally nodded and allowed him to pass. Daniel walked fast through the hall until he reached the war chamber. The queen stood over a glowing map, her advisors surrounding her. They were marking points of fire, showing where enemy ships descended. Her face was steady, but her eyes carried storm. The guards moved to stop Daniel, but the queen raised her hand. Let him speak. Daniel stepped forward. His hands shook, but his voice was strong. He spoke in her language, slow and careful, so she could hear every word. Your people strong. Your people fight with heart. But enemies, many. Humans know war. We can help. We fight with you, not for you. Together strong. The hall went silent. Advisors whispered, some angry, others uncertain. One shouted that humans could not be trusted. Another warned that allowing outsiders into battle could dishonor their ancestors. But the queen kept her eyes on Daniel. His words were broken, but his meaning was clear. He was not offering control, not offering command. He was offering loyalty. Finally, the queen spoke. You would fight for a people not your own? Why? Daniel's throat was dry, but he answered without hesitation. Because you are not only ruler. You are voice of people. If you fall, they fall. If you live, they live. I want you to live. The words hung in the air like fire. For a moment, the queen did not move. Then she nodded slowly. Very well. Prove your words. Fight with us. But if you betray us, the price will be heavy. Daniel bowed. I will not betray. Captain Harris and the rest of the crew were soon called. Their ship, the Aurora, was brought into the Queen's defense plan. Human weapons joined Zyari blades and energy shields. For the first time, the two species stood side by side, preparing for the storm. That night, the battle began. Enemy ships tore through the sky, raining fire onto the forests. Zyari archers launched glowing arrows, striking targets with deadly precision. Human cannons roared from the Aurora, blasting holes through steel hulls. The air was filled with smoke, fire, and the cries of warriors. Daniel was not a soldier, but he stood with the defenders in the palace walls. He shouted warnings, passed supplies, and spoke what little of their language he knew to keep their spirits alive. Every time he used a word correctly, the warriors around him seemed to fight harder. At the center of the field, the queen fought with her guard. Her silver robe was replaced by armor, her staff glowing like lightning in her hands. She moved with strength and grace, her voice carrying commands that rallied her people. From the walls, Daniel watched her, his chest burning with both fear and pride. She was more than a ruler. She was the heart of her world. The battle raged through the night. The humans and the Zyari together pushed the enemy back. Ships fell, fires dimmed, and the skies slowly cleared. At last, the invaders retreated, leaving behind only smoke and silence. The palace bells rang in victory. The people cheered, their voices rising like thunder. For the first time, the humans were not seen as strangers but as allies. In the war chamber, the queen removed her helmet. Her face was tired, but her eyes still burned bright. She turned to Daniel. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice only he could hear, she spoke in her language. You gave your words. Tonight, you proved them. Daniel bowed, his chest heavy with relief. Always, he whispered back in her tongue. The queen's eyes lingered on him. There was no smile, but there was something deeper: acknowledgement, respect, and perhaps a spark of something more. The war was not over. The enemy would return one day. But tonight, a bond had been sealed, not with paper or ink, but with fire, trust, and the courage of words spoken in the heart of battle. The fires of the battle had cooled, but the smell of smoke still lingered in the air. The city had survived, yet scars remained on the stone and the hearts of the people. Everywhere Daniel walked, the Zyori gave him nods of respect. Some even touched their hands to their chests, a gesture of honor among their kind. Humanity was no longer seen as outsiders. They were brothers and sisters in struggle. But for Daniel, something else weighed on him. Victory was important, yet his mind returned again and again to the moment in the war chamber when the queen looked into his eyes. He remembered her voice, low and steady, when she told him he had proved his words. The look she gave him carried something deeper than duty. It was that look which haunted him. Each night, Daniel returned to his notes. He practiced her language again and again. He was no longer content with simple phrases of loyalty and strength. Now he searched for words that reached the heart. He wanted to speak to her, not as an ally, not as a guest, but as a man who carried a truth inside him. The others noticed his obsession. Captain Harris teased him lightly. You spend more time whispering into that notebook than sleeping, Daniel. Careful, or you'll start dreaming in their language. Daniel smiled but said nothing. He knew what he was doing was dangerous. The queen was more than a leader. She was a symbol, a sacred figure to her people. To speak words of love to her could be seen as bold, even foolish. Yet Daniel could not stop. His heart was stubborn, and it demanded a voice. One evening, he found himself summoned again to the palace gardens. The queen had asked for him personally. When he arrived, he saw her standing near the great fountain of crystal water, her silver robe flowing softly in the night breeze. Lanterns glowed among the trees, and the stars shone clear above. She turned as he approached, her eyes calm but thoughtful. Daniel, she said through the translator at first, then added a few words in her own tongue. Come. He obeyed, walking to her side. For a while, there was silence. The sound of the water filled the air. Finally, she spoke. You fought with us when you had no reason to. You risked your lives. Why did you do it? Daniel's chest tightened. He had been waiting for this chance. Carefully, he switched off the translator on his belt. His hands trembled, but he looked at her directly. He spoke in her language, slowly and clearly. Because your people strong. Because your fight just. But more than this, because of you. The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in curiosity. He continued, pushing past his nerves. When I look at you, I see not only queen. I see courage. I see fire. I see heart that carries many. And I wish to stand near that heart. Not only in battle. In life. His words were broken, accented, but each one was spoken with care. He had practiced for weeks. The queen's lips parted slightly, her eyes locked on his. The silence between them grew heavy. Finally, She asked softly in her language, "What are you trying to tell me, Daniel?" Daniel felt his heart pounding against his ribs. This was the moment. He steadied his breath and spoke the phrase he had practiced 1,000 times. "I love you." The words were simple in her tongue, only 3 sounds, yet they carried the weight of everything inside him. He said them with all the strength he had. The queen froze. For the first time since Daniel had met her, true surprise lit her face. Her eyes widened, and her lips trembled as if she had forgotten how to speak. The queen, who always carried dignity and calm, now stood speechless. She looked at him for a long time, and the silence stretched until Daniel feared he had made a mistake. His chest felt heavy, his throat dry. At last, she whispered, almost to herself, "You spoke my tongue." And those were words no outsider has ever dared to say. Daniel lowered his head. "I speak truth. Not for gain. Not for power. Only truth from heart." The queen turned away slightly, gazing at the fountain. The light of the stars reflected on her silver robe. She did not answer at once. Instead, she stood in thought, as if wrestling with a storm inside her. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "Daniel, you do not understand the weight of what you said. A queen is bound to her people before all else. My heart is not my own to give freely. It belongs first to the crown, to the bloodline, to the oath." Her words struck him, but he did not retreat. He stepped closer, though still with respect. "I understand duty. I understand crown. But I also understand heart. And I believe heart can hold both duty and love." The queen looked at him again, her eyes sharper now, searching him as if to test his soul. "Do you think love is simple, Daniel? Do you think my people would accept such a bond with one not of their kind?" Daniel shook his head. "Not simple. Never simple. But worth fighting for. Humans know struggle. Humans know love can move mountains. If heart strong, people follow. If truth pure, trust grows." The words came out rough, but they burned with honesty. The queen's expression softened slightly. For the first time, there was no mask, no barrier. She was not only ruler now, she was a woman faced with a choice. She stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could see the faint glow of her eyes in the starlight. "You risk much by saying this to me. If another heard, they would call it insult, even crime. Why do you not fear?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Because love greater than fear." The queen stared at him, her breath steady but deep. Then she looked away again, her hands clasped before her. For a long time, neither spoke. The night wind rustled the leaves, carrying the sound of distant bells from the city below. At last, she said, "I do not know yet what to answer. But I cannot deny your words touched me. I will think on them." Daniel bowed his head with respect. "That is enough. I wanted you to know." The queen nodded slowly. "Go now. Rest. Tomorrow brings new burdens. But tonight, you have changed something inside me." Daniel walked back through the garden, his chest still racing. He had spoken the truth. He had told her in her own language, and though her reply was uncertain, her eyes had revealed what words did not. The queen of the Zyari was surprised, yes. But beneath that surprise, Daniel felt a spark of something deeper, something fragile yet powerful, waiting to grow. For the first time, he believed that love might bridge not only hearts but entire worlds. The days after the battle were filled with rebuilding. The people of the Zyari worked together, repairing walls, clearing smoke, and honoring those who had fallen. The humans joined in, carrying stone, lifting beams, and sharing food. Slowly, the city began to breathe again. Daniel worked beside them, but his heart was restless. He had spoken the words to the queen, words no human had dared to speak. She had not rejected him, yet she had not accepted either. Her silence lingered in his mind. Every time he saw her in the palace halls, his chest tightened. She walked with the same grace, the same dignity, but now her eyes seemed different. When they met his, they carried a question, an unspoken weight between them. One evening, Captain Harris approached Daniel as they stacked supplies in the palace yard. "You look like a man waiting for judgment," the captain said with a half-smile. "Did you say something bold to her?" Daniel gave a quiet laugh, though his face was serious. "Yes. I told her something bold. Now I wait." The captain studied him. "She is not just a woman. She is their queen. If she listens to you, it will change more than hearts. It could change the future of two species." Daniel nodded. He knew. And yet he would not take back his words. The choice came sooner than expected. The council of elders was called to the great hall. The queen stood before them, her silver robe shining in the torchlight. Daniel and the humans were invited to stand at the edge, as allies who had fought in the defense of the city. The hall was filled with tension. An elder with a long staff stepped forward. His voice echoed. "The humans have proven themselves in battle. They are strong, and their weapons are useful. But now a greater question rises. What is their place among us? Do they remain guests? Do they leave? Or do they become more?" The queen listened, her face unreadable. Another elder spoke sharply. "We must not allow outsiders to twist the throne. Our ancestors would not approve." Daniel felt the eyes of the hall on him and his crew. Whispers moved like waves through the chamber. He realized this was not only about alliances. This was about him. The queen raised her hand, and the hall fell silent. Her voice was steady. "The humans stood with us when others fled. They spilled their blood on our soil. They are no longer strangers. They are allies." The hall rumbled with mixed voices. Some cheered. Others shook their heads. The elders demanded clarity. "And what of the bond we see growing between you and their speaker, Daniel?" one asked boldly. The air froze. Daniel felt his heart stop. All eyes turned to him, then back to the queen. For a long time, she said nothing. The silence was heavy. Daniel lowered his gaze, ready for her to deny it. It would be the safe choice. She was queen. She had to protect her crown. But then she stepped forward. Her voice rang clear. "Daniel spoke words to me that no other has spoken. Words of the heart. He said them in our language, with courage and truth. It surprised me. It moved me." The hall erupted. Some shouted in anger, others in disbelief. A few voices cried in support. The queen lifted her hand again, silencing them. "I am queen," she said. "My duty is to my people. But my people need more than walls and swords. They need hope. They need to see that we can build bridges with those beyond our stars. That we can stand not alone, but with friends who care for us." Her eyes moved to Daniel, steady and strong. Yes, he spoke of love. And yes, I felt the weight of his words. I do not deny it. Daniel's breath caught. He could not believe what he was hearing. The elder with the staff shouted, it is dangerous. A bond with a human could break tradition. It could weaken the crown. The queen's eyes blazed. Tradition that refuses to grow will wither and die. I will not let my people die clinging to fear. The hall shook with voices again, but this time, many were cheering. The younger warriors, those who had fought beside the humans, shouted their support. Together we are stronger, they cried. The queen lifted her staff high. I choose to honor our bond with humanity. And I will not hide my respect for the man who dared to speak truth to me. Her words carried finality. The elders could argue, but the decision of the queen was clear. Later that night, Daniel stood once more in the palace garden. The stars glowed above, and the air was quiet. He turned as he heard soft footsteps. The queen approached, her face calm but her eyes bright. You spoke boldly, she said in her language, without the translator. Daniel smiled faintly. And you answered boldly. For a moment, they stood in silence, the night wrapping around them. Finally, Daniel took a breath. When I told you I love you, I was ready for rejection. But I had to say it. It was truth. The queen's gaze softened. And when I heard your words, I was shaken. No one has ever spoken to me like that. But I am not only a queen. I am also a woman. And tonight, I let myself be both. Daniel's heart raced. So, what do you feel? She stepped closer. Her hand, adorned with silver rings, rose and rested gently on his chest. I feel that love can build a bridge where none existed before. And I feel that your courage has touched me. Daniel's throat tightened. He answered in her tongue, carefully but clearly. Then I am honored. For the first time, the queen smiled, not the controlled smile of a ruler, but the quiet, real smile of someone opening her heart. The stars above seemed brighter. The garden's fountain sang softly. Two worlds, once strangers, now stood on the edge of something greater. The war had tested them, the council had questioned them, but love had found its way through fear and tradition. And in that moment, Daniel knew this was more than romance. It was the beginning of a new story for humanity and the Zyuri. A story where love itself had proven that humanity was more than wanderers in the stars. Humanity could be the bridge that connected hearts, no matter how different the worlds might be.